The transmission key clicked, and the alien flagship began to burn. Commander Sierra Voss stood on the bridge of the Rustwind. She held a tarnished brass sextant in her left hand. The hinges were green with age. She did not use it to measure the distance to the dying ship. She used it to measure the gap between the stars behind it. The Vorthani Dominion had filed 12,000 human deaths under the word regrettable. The warship filed their entire fleet under the word logged. No terms offered, no surrender accepted, no mercy given. The coalition vessels held a perfect arc in the dark. The flagship's hull plates peeled back like dry skin. Voss watched the fire vent into the vacuum. She kept her finger on the key. The silence stretched out, heavy and absolute, waiting for the final hull breach. If you want your sci-fi with a cold dose of payback, hit that subscribe button. Let's see how the paperwork was forged. At the peak of the engagement, the past caught up with the present. But the fuse was lit earlier, when the vote came down at 387-12. Sub-Commander Thessaly Vor sat in the curved tiers of the Obsidian Forum. The air smelled of ozone and old resin. She was an archival aide. Her job was to record the truth. Her hands shook as she typed. Below her, Fleet Lord Drenthkor stood at the speaking block. He was tall, his carapace the color of dried blood. Small sensory tendrils hung flat against his jaw. He did not smile. He spoke in the steady, flat tone of a clerk reading a budget report. The pacification of the human mining colony is complete, Kor said. The loss of life is noted. The action falls within acceptable bounds. Thessaly pressed her fingers to the data slab. Her skin secreted a mild phosphor when she was stressed. Today, the chemical rubbed off on the screen, leaving a glowing smear across the official record. She typed the ruling, regrettable, proportionate. The Galactic Military Council accepted it. The human delegates sat in the upper rows. They said nothing. They did not yell. They did not protest. They just watched. Thessaly felt a cold knot in her stomach. As the file closed, another data packet pinged on her private channel. It was an automated departure log from the human docking ring. Every human ship was leaving the station. No complaints filed. No lawyers deployed. Just empty slips. Thessaly stood up and walked down to the lower floor. She found Kor in the transit hall. He was reviewing supply costs on a datapad. Fleet Lord, Thessaly said. She kept her head down. The human delegates have left. They did not submit a formal grievance. Kor did not look up. Good, it saves us the paperwork. They also pulled their ships from the outer rings, she said. All of them, at the exact same time. Kor tapped his screen. They are scared. They are a minor species. They know their place. I have recorded conflicts for a long time, Thessaly said softly. Species usually shout when they are angry. They demand justice. The humans are just quiet. Kor finally looked at her. His dark eyes were empty. Civilized warfare is a matter of ledgers, Sub-Commander. We close the ledger, file the report, and go back to your desk. He turned and walked away. Thessaly looked down at her hands. The glowing phosphor was still there. She knew a closed ledger did not stop a war. It just hid the cost. Far from the station, the Rustwind floated in the dark. The ship smelled of engine grease and oolong tea. The hull paint was chipped. A long blast scar marked the port side. The registry listed it as a light patrol boat built for simple border checks. Sierra Voss sat at the center console. She wore a faded red bandana tied at her left wrist. It was the only color on her dark uniform. She had spent her life in the Void Navy. She knew how to wait. She pulled the brass sextant from her coat pocket. She lifted it to the viewport and bit the inside of her cheek. It was an old habit from childhood math tests. Reading, she said quietly. Lieutenant Cale Marsh tapped his carbon fiber log tablet. He always whispered, "Still tracking the exact angle, Commander, the Kithani point." Voss closed the sextant with a sharp snap. "Keep the engines running hot." Chief Petty Officer George Samuel stood near the back hatch. He tapped a heavy torque wrench against his leg. He hummed a low tune. "We are pushing the limit, Commander. The registry says we run low output. We are burning way above that class." "The registry is a piece of paper," Voss said. Ambassador Ilan Vance sat in the corner of the bridge. Her diplomatic sash was torn. She had not slept in days. She was the sole survivor of the colony Corps had just pacified. She looked up at Voss. "Corps thinks we are going to file a grievance. He thinks we will send lawyers to the Forum." "Let him think that," Voss said. She looked at the Kethani coordinate on the main screen. The angle matched the sextant, but the scanners picked up a shadow moving through the drift, something massive that did not cast light. "We have company," Marsh whispered. Voss walked to the airlock. The heavy door cycled open with a hiss. Elder Myra Thessaly stepped aboard. She was Mavari. She was small and frail, her skin glowing with faint light. Her people were observers. The council ignored them because they did not build warships. She held a small memory orb in her hands. "You are moving toward the Kethani transit point," Myra said. "We are on a routine patrol," Voss said. Myra shook her head. "I remember when the Iron Charter was signed, a lifetime ago." Voss stopped. She looked at the old alien. The Iron Charter was a buried secret. Only a handful of humans even knew the name. It was a document that allowed the quiet construction of real warships, hidden inside the shells of patrol boats. "The Vorthani fleet is moving through that sector," Myra said. "They are traveling in parade formation. They think the war is over." "It is," Voss said. "They filed the paperwork." "Some species shout when they are angry," Myra said softly. "You make entries." Myra held out the memory orb. "The Vorthani have left their flank exposed. I have the navigational charts they deleted, but you cannot break their line alone." "We are not alone," a new voice said. Cadet Priya Akafer stepped onto the bridge leading a tall, avian figure. It was Jorik Tan, a Tessari pilot. His bones were hollow. His people had been dismissed by the council years ago. "The coalition of the quiet is ready," Tan said. He looked at the main screen. "The hidden ships are holding, all off the books, all waiting for the signal." Voss nodded. She pulled the red bandana tighter around her wrist. "Put the coordinates into the main drive. We meet them at the drift." On the other side of the sector, the Vorthani fleet broke orbit. They moved in a parade formation. The ships were massive, layered in thick armor plating. They blocked out the stars as they passed. Drenth Kor stood on the observation deck of the flagship. He watched the dark expanse of space. He felt nothing but the satisfaction of a clean ledger. The human colony was gone. The resource rights were secured. The paperwork was filed. A junior officer stepped up to the deck. "Fleet Lord, we are plotting the course through the Kethani Drift. It is the fastest route back to the core worlds." "Do we have escort screens deployed?" Kor asked. "They are running below minimum width," the officer said. "We did not want to waste fuel. The sector is empty. The humans have no naval presence here." Kor nodded. "Keep the screens tight. We march in triumph. Let the quiet species watch us pass." He turned his back to the viewport. He did not know that the shadows in the drift were already waiting. Thessaly Vor sat in her cramped quarters on the Vorthani flagship. The main lights were off. She pulled up the human departure logs on her personal slate. Her tendrils curled tight against her neck. The humans had not simply flown away from the docking ring. They had purged the root code of their slips. According to the station mainframe, human ships had never docked there at all. She tapped the screen. The deletion carried a security override she did not recognize. It was old, older than her career. She tried to trace the source, but the trail ended at a blank file. A file with no name, no date, and no size. It just sat in the system, invisible to anyone who did not know exactly where to look. On the Rustwind, the invisible was becoming real. Jorik Tan plugged his Tessari data drive into the main navigation console. The human interface did not reject the alien hardware. It locked in and began processing the gravitational charts. Cadet Akafer watched the screen turn green. How did it do that? Our systems are not compatible with Tessari tech. The Council banned cross-system integration. The Council banned it, Voss said. We ignored it. She walked to the center table and pulled up a heavy digital file. We signed the Iron Charter 94 years ago, long before the Vorthani decided we were a problem. The human diplomats saw how the Council worked. They saw that the law only protected the strong. Voss looked around the bridge, so we built ships that looked weak. Samuels unclipped his torque wrench. He walked over to a sealed panel on the back wall. The metal was painted with a yellow warning stripe. The registry says we have a standard reactor and basic patrol shielding, he said. He slammed the wrench into the locking mechanism. The seal broke with a sharp crack. The registry lied, Samuel said. He pulled the panel down. Behind it sat a heavy kinetic weapon control board. It was wired directly into the ship's main drive. Akafer took a step back. The Rustwind was not a patrol boat. It was a spear. Ambassador Vance watched the panel drop. For the first time since her colony fell, her shoulders relaxed. She did not smile, but she stopped shaking. We built them quietly, Voss said. We trained with the species the Council ignored. The Tessari mapped the dark zones. The Mavari kept the records. We waited until the ledger was closed. The Rustwind banked hard. The ship shuddered as Tan pushed the engines past their fake limits. They plunged deep into the Cathani drift. The drift was a massive field of dead rock and thick dust. It was a navigational nightmare. The Vorthani flagship moved through it like a giant, slow beast. Drenth Kor sat in his command chair. He watched the rocks bounce off his heavy shields. He drank a cup of warm nutrient broth. The parade formation held. The smaller escort ships flew close to the flagship, keeping their sensor nets tight to save power. Thessaly Vor stood by the tactical station. She did not care about the power supply. She cared about the math. Fleet Lord, she said. Her voice broke the quiet hum of the bridge. Kor sighed. What is it now, Sub-Commander? The gravity readings in this sector are wrong, she said. She pointed at the main tactical display. The mass of the asteroids does not account for the gravitational pull. Something else is out there, something dense. It is iron ore, Kor said. He did not even look at the screen. This whole drift is full of it. That is why it interferes with the scanners. The pull is organized, Thessaly said. She typed fast, bringing up a wireframe model. It is holding a geometric pattern. Rocks do not fly in formation. Kor set his cup down. He finally turned his head. Before he could speak, the tactical officer shouted. Proximity alert, port side. A massive shadow peeled away from an asteroid. It was the Rustwind, but it did not look like a patrol boat anymore. The outer hull plates had shifted back, exposing the heavy kinetic lances. The ship burned with an angry, bright light. Voss stood on her bridge. She held the brass sextant. She checked the angle through the viewport. 47 degrees, she said. Perfect lock. They are raising shields, Marsh whispered. His hands flew across the targeting board. They are trying to widen the escort screen. Let them try, Voss said. Drop the camouflage. Tan hit the comms relay. The signal shot through the drift. All around the Vorthani fleet, the shadows broke apart. The rest of the hidden ships dropped their stealth fields. They were a mix of human, Tessari, Mavari, and Cathani designs. They did not match. They did not look like a uniform military force. But their weapons were all hot, and their targeting lasers all pointed at the flagship. The quiet species had brought a fleet. On the Vorthani bridge, the red emergency lights flashed. The klaxon screamed. Thessaly watched the screen fill with hostile targets. Her phosphor sweat glowed bright blue on her collar. They are everywhere, the tactical officer yelled. We are boxed in. Kor gripped the arms of his chair. Who are they? Where did they come from? Thessaly looked at the blank file she had traced earlier. Now she understood what it was. It was not a glitch. It was a door. They came from the paperwork we didn't read, she said. Voss looked at the burning red target on her screen. The Vorthani flagship was huge. It was heavily armed, but it was slow and it was caught. Open a direct channel to Fleet Lord Kor, Voss said. Akafor punched the button. Channel open, Commander. Voss did not yell. She did not boast. She leaned forward, the brass sextant cold in her hand, and prepared to close the ledger. We are updating the record, Voss said. Kor's voice blasted through the bridge speakers. You are an unregistered vessel. Disengage or be destroyed. Fire, Voss said. The kinetic lances activated. The Rustwind shook violently as the heavy slugs accelerated. They hit the closest Vorthani cruiser before Kor even finished his sentence. The cruiser's thick armor shattered like thin ice. The ship folded inward, crushed by the extreme impact. No alarm sounded. No pods launched. No survivors remained. The rest of the coalition fleet unleashed hell. Tessari ships darted between the heavy asteroids. They fired short bursts from fast turrets. Mavari ships painted targets with tight beams, cutting through the thick dust to blind the enemy sensors. The Kethani heavy ships absorbed the returning fire. Their thick hulls took the plasma hits without venting air. They pushed forward like slow, angry mountains. The ambush was brutal. It was entirely off the books. On the Vorthani flagship, the parade formation collapsed completely. Thessaly Vor gripped her console. The massive deck rocked under her feet. The Vorthani captains tried to form a defensive wall. They pulled their ships close together, but they had never fought an enemy that refused to stand still. Return fire, Kor shouted. He slammed his fist on the command chair. Sweep the drift, clear the dust. We cannot lock on, the tactical officer yelled. They are hiding in the dark zones. Our computers cannot read their mass. The targeting locks keep slipping. Thessaly watched the data stream. The Vorthani military relied on overwhelming force in open space. They filed their victories based on sheer numbers. They fought long wars, confident they could outspend any enemy. But here in the dark, the ledgers were useless. The enemy did not care about forms. The enemy did not file complaints. The enemy just wanted them dead. Another Vorthani cruiser exploded. The shockwave rattled the flagship's hull. Reroute power to the forward shields, Kor ordered. His voice lost its calm, flat drone. He was beginning to shout. Push through the drift. We will crush them with our main battery. Back on the Rustwind, the main deck vibrated heavily. A power conduit blew near the back wall. Sparks sprayed across the metal floor. Cadet Akafor flinched and covered her face with her arms. Samuels did not look up. He pulled his torque wrench and tightened a secondary valve. Coolant pressure dropping, he hummed. The warning light on the reactor core kept flashing. The heat was rising fast. If the core melted, the kinetic lances would shut down. He hit the valve again. The metal groaned. I need more pressure. Akafor scrambled over to the engineering panel. She bypassed the safety locks and flooded the lines with raw coolant. The red light stopped flashing. Samuels gave her a single nod and went back to his wrench. Lieutenant Marsh dragged his finger across his log tablet. He stopped. He tapped the screen again. Commander, Marsh whispered, we lost the flagship. Voss turned from the viewport. It is a heavy warship. It does not just disappear. They cut their trackers, Marsh said. They killed their own main drive to drop off the heat scans. They are drifting in the dust. I have no visual and no radar lock. Voss walked to the side table. She picked up her cup of oolong tea. It was cold. She took a slow sip anyway. The bitter taste grounded her. The ship was silent except for the hum of the tired reactor. Everyone waited for the massive ship to reveal itself. The silence felt heavy. Ambassador Vance had not spoken since they entered the drift. Now she stood up. Her torn diplomatic sash dragged on the floor. She walked past Voss and stopped at the main viewport. She pressed her bare hand against the thick glass. She stared into the dark dust cloud. "They are not drifting," Vance said. Her voice was flat and hollow. "They are venting their own air to push themselves forward. Cold thrust. It is an old pacification tactic. They use it to crush mining colonies without using fuel. They drop out of the sky and flatten the domes." Voss looked out the window. A massive black shape eclipsed the stars. The Vorthani flagship was not trying to shoot them. It was going to ram them. The warship filled the screen, a solid wall of metal moving with unstoppable momentum. The Rustwind was too small to take the hit. The engines were already pushed to the limit. There was no room to dodge in the thick dust. "Brace," Voss said. Tan Akafor yelled. The Tessari pilot gripped the controls. "We cannot go around. The gravity well is too steep on the port side. If we turn, we snap the hull." "Go down," Voss said. Tan slammed the yoke forward. The Rustwind dropped fast into the gravity trench. The Vorthani warship scraped across their upper shields. The sound was a deafening scream of tearing metal. The main lights flickered and died. The emergency red glow kicked in, painting the bridge in blood-colored light. Sparks rained down on the deck. Samuels hammered his wrench against the coolant line. He needed to keep the core from melting down under the sudden strain. Marsh held onto his console as the deck tilted hard. The flagship passed over them, massive and relentless. But it did not stop. Core had committed to the cold thrust. The massive ship was too heavy to turn in the tight trench. It could not pull up. It plowed straight into a giant Cathani asteroid. The impact shook the entire sector. The rock did not break. The flagship did. The front half of the warship crumpled. The thick hull plates buckled and tore like paper. Fire vented out into the vacuum, bright and angry. The engagement clock on Marsh's tablet ticked to exactly 17. Voss stood up straight. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the brass sextant. She walked back to the center console and placed her hand over the transmission key. The battle was over. The ledger was open. Voss did not yell. She did not boast. She leaned forward, the brass sextant cold in her hand, and prepared to close the ledger. "This is the Rustwind," she said. Her voice remained at the same volume she used for morning tea. "The Vorthani fleet is no longer a factor. The ledger is now closed." Those were the 14 words. She did not wait for a reply. She tapped the key and the transmission cut out. The bridge of the Rustwind fell into a sudden, thick silence. The emergency lights pulsed red against the metal walls. Somewhere deep in the ship, a cooling pump rattled. Outside the viewport, the Vorthani flagship was a broken skeleton of burning steel. Marsh tapped his log tablet. His fingers moved with a rhythmic, steady grace. "Flagship is down. Escort ships are scattering. The coalition vessels are holding position in the defensive arc." Samuels wiped grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked at the torque wrench sitting on the floor. It was covered in coolant and oil. "Engine output is falling back to the baseline," he said. He did not look at the screens. He just watched the pressure gauge drop. "Do we pursue?" Akafor asked. She was still sitting at the engineering console, her hands hovering over the bypass safety switches. Voss looked at the brass sextant. The lid was open. She saw the reflection of the dying ship in the polished metal surface. "No," Voss said. "The point of the drill was never to destroy them. The point was to prove they could be counted." She closed the lid with a snap that resonated through the bridge. The brass clicked shut. It was a small, sharp sound, but in the quiet of the ship, it sounded like a heavy door locking. On the other side of the drift, Thessaly Vor watched the carnage from the escape pod's small viewport. She held a memory slate in her lap. Her tendrils were still. She did not type. She did not file. She watched the human vessel, the Rustwind, hold its place in the dark. It did not move to chase the fleeing escorts. It simply waited. Thessaly picked up her stylus. She typed one final entry into the archival record. It was not a report. It was a note. The war was not lost because of a lack of force. It was lost because the record was incomplete. She saved the file. Then she reached into the pod's interface and wiped the local registry clean. She stood up and walked to the small storage locker, pulling out a plain, standard-issue blanket. She sat on the floor and stared at the door. Back on the Rustwind, Voss walked to the airlock. She found Ambassador Vance standing by the viewport, staring out at the Kethani asteroid. "They will come for us," Vance said. Her voice was thin, but it was no longer hollow. "They will come for the report," Voss corrected. "But they will find that the report says exactly what we want it to say." She turned and headed toward her quarters. She stopped by the side table and picked up the cold cup of oolong tea. She took one last sip, the taste sharp and bitter against her tongue. She walked into her room and laid the brass sextant on the metal desk. The instrument measured the angle between the Kethani point and the drifting debris. The needle sat perfectly on 47 degrees. She did not move it. She did not check the charts. She sat in her chair and stared at the wall. The Rustwind's engines went cold. The ship drifted in the silence of the drift, a ghost in the machine of the galaxy. No victory parades followed. No medals were pinned to their jackets. The news cycle of the conquered would spend a week in confusion, debating whether the Vorthani fleet had suffered a tragic navigational error or a systems failure. The truth was filed in a location where the Council would never think to search. Voss rested her hands on the desk. She could still feel the vibration of the ship in the metal, the last echo of the kinetic lances firing in the dark. The brass sextant sat on the desk, its lid closed tight. The light from the emergency red lamps caught the edge of the hinge, turning the green tarnish into a deep, dark gold. The room was silent. The dust cloud outside the window moved, swirling in the gravity of the crushed warship. The needle on the sextant did not move.